Hello and welcome back. Now you're in rule number 8. Rule number 8 is also in the sailing and steering section. Now this is a very important rule and it focuses on the actions that you need to take to avoid a collision. So sharpen your note-taking pencil and let's jump right in. Rule number 8A states that any action taken to avoid collision shall be taken in accordance with the rules of this part and shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be positive, made in ample time, and with due regard to the observance of good seamanship. This rule is simply stating that when you take action to avoid a collision, it must be made in ample time to ensure that the collision is avoided. And it should be made with due regard to good seamanship. What this means is that you must use accurate data and not use scanty, which is poor or bad information when making your decisions. Remember that you always want to ensure that you have good data because having bad or scanty information can lead to you making a decision and taking action that could be the wrong action to take. Rule 8B states that any alteration of course and or speed to avoid collision shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be large enough to be readily apparent to another vessel observing visually or by radar. A succession of small alterations of course and or speed should be avoided. So what this is saying is that if you make a course adjustment to avoid a collision, it has to be a large course or speed adjustment to be clearly apparent to the other vessel. You should never make a series of small course adjustments and small speed adjustments. This can create confusion to the other vessel on your intent. When you make a large course or speed adjustment, it becomes very apparent to the other vessel that you have made a change to avoid a collision. Now, to help you understand this better, let's pretend that you're walking along the sidewalk. And while you're walking on the sidewalk, you notice a car is approaching you, driving off the road on the sidewalk, coming head on towards you. Now, let's think about this. If that car were to start slowing down very slowly, but is still coming towards you, are you going to feel secure that that car is not going to hit you? Now, what if that car made a very slight adjustment, but they're still traveling towards you and you're still in danger of being hit? Do you feel safe then? Now, what if you're walking down the sidewalk and that same car that was coming towards you made a big swerve and got back into the road, into the lane of traffic? I'll bet that without even speaking to the driver of that car, you would have a very high sense of relief that that driver noticed you, noticed that they were off the road, and made a quick adjustment to get back onto the road and avoid hitting you. Now, these same principles apply when you're navigating. Rule 8C states, if there is sufficient sea room, alteration of course alone may be the most effective action to avoid a close quarters situation, provided that it is made in good time and is substantial and does not result in another close quarters situation. Now, what this is saying is if you're in open, hazard-free water, changing your course, a large course change, may simply be the most effective way to avoid a collision. Always remember that you can always go back to your desired course after the risk of collision is not present. Now, the very important part, which is the second part of that, is that if you make a course alteration to avoid a collision, that course alteration that you made can now not put you in a new close quarters situation or another risk of collision with another vessel. Meaning, let's say that you're navigating along and there are other vessels around you and there's a potential risk to a vessel that's coming towards you. You could not make a large course change to port and now create a potential collision with another vessel that is off your port side. So let's go back to thinking about like if you're driving in your car. Now let's imagine that you're driving and you're in a situation where you're gonna rear end the car that's directly in front of you. What it's trying to say is that you definitely wouldn't swerve your car into oncoming traffic to avoid a rear end collision with the car in front of you, because now you're putting yourself at risk of another accident. What you would try to do is to swerve your car and avoid the risk of any accidents. Same thing applies when you're thinking about the rules of navigation. You don't want to take your vessel to swerve, or alter your course to avoid a collision and now create a new collision situation. Rule 8D states that action taken to avoid collision with another vessel shall be such as to result in passing at a safe distance. The effectiveness of the action shall be carefully checked until the other vessel is finally passing clear. Now, this is simply saying that any action that you take to avoid a collision should always ensure that you pass the other vessel at a safe distance. And you should always be closely monitoring the situation until you are safely past and clear of the other vessel. And ultimately, there is no longer a risk of collision. Rule 8E states that if necessary to avoid collision or allow more time to assess the situation, a vessel shall slacken her speed or take all the way off by stopping or reversing her means of propulsion. So this is an easy one, and it means exactly what you read. To avoid a collision or allow more time for you to assess the situation, you can slow down your speed all the way and even bring your vessel into reverse propulsion. Now, always remember that if you do this and you put your vessel into reverse propulsion, that you do not create another situation where you might hit something else behind you. Now, this sounds pretty self-explanatory, but one time I was at our local marina and I saw a captain that was about to dock their boat. They were gonna hit the dock with their bow, and he put it into a hard reverse, and he didn't hit the bow, but he didn't look back, and what happened, that boat went straight into reverse and they crashed into the dock behind them with the motors. Be cognizant of your surroundings and thoroughly assess the situation that you're in. Rule 8F, Item 1, states that a vessel which by any of these rules is required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel shall, when required by the circumstances of the case, take early action to allow sufficient sea room for the safe passage of the other vessel. So this is simply stating that if you have to give way to another vessel, you have to do it in ample time to ensure that the stand-on vessel has enough room to proceed safely. Rule 8F, Item 2, states that a vessel required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel is not relieved of this obligation if approaching the other vessel so as to involve risk of collision, and shall, when taking action, have full regard to the action which may be required by the rules of this part. So what this is saying is that when you're required not to impede the safe passage of another ship, you cannot ignore the rule, and you must take appropriate action. And you have to ensure that the action that you take does not put the other vessel in harm's way. Rule 8F, Item 3 states that a vessel, the passage of which is not to be impeded, remains fully obliged to comply with the rules of this part when the two vessels are approaching one another so as to involve risk of collision. So this simply states that if a vessel has a special condition or is a stand-on vessel, they are obligated to follow the rules and not create a potential risk of collision, meaning that they would have to take action if you did not take action. And always remember that if there's any doubt if a risk of collision exists, you have to treat it like if a risk of collision is present and take appropriate action. All right, congratulations on making it to the end of rule number 8. I would tell you study these notes really hard, because risk of collision and actions to avoid a collision are covered extensively in the final exam. Don't forget that the primary reason why these rules were created was to avoid collisions at sea. So go back, review your notes, study hard, and I'll see you in the next video.